In today's real estate market, homes are moving fast. And part of the problem that new buyers are seeing is that they're buying homes where they found out there's major problems with them that weren't disclosed to them by the sellers. Today we're going to talk about sellers' disclosures issues and what you need to know if you're trying to purchase your first home. Welcome back to #Lawyered Guys. We got Andrea and myself here today, and I've been talking about this housing market for a while.
Oh, it's wild.
And we're hoping to get a couple of guests in to talk about it as well. And
Trying to reel them in. They're a little busy.
They're real busy. That's a great way to put it. You're exactly right. And part of the issue, we're seeing this in my office all the time, is that we've got what I blanket call sellers' disclosures issues with homes. And so I wanted to talk about this a little bit today. And part of the reason is because people are buying and selling houses real fast. These houses are flying off the market. People are getting excited because they're in a bidding war over these houses. And so they're kind of, them and their agents, and no offense to real estate agents, but they're trying to close deals. They're trying to make their clients happy.
They're not lawyers.
They're not lawyers.
Be mindful, they're not lawyers.
And a lot of times when you cut corners,
don't ever do that.
You can find out that we've got some major issues maybe with this house that we didn't know about.
Yeah.
That's expensive.
It's real effing expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I keep telling Spencer, I was like, thank God we not only got married when we did, which was like a few months before COVID, but we also bought our house when we did, which is when we had a favorable buying market.
Yeah.
On the flip side, if you're trying to sell a house, it's actually a great market to do so.
Exactly.
Because the number of my friends who have come to me and that they've said that they've gone through 7 different houses before they finally land one, where they go in, they're the first person to view the house. They make an offer within an hour of it being on the market, and they do cash 20% over and still don't get the house. Yeah. Wild.
Right.
Wild.
Right. And I'll be interested once we get a guest on here to hear more about some of the details of those things. But what'll be good about today is we can talk about your home purchase and kind of some of just the steps that you went through, when you did this. And so, and really, we're going to drill down into the seller's disclosures issues, but might as well give a little backdrop on the process and all those things that go into it, because it ties into.
And this is really good, right? Because if anyone is looking to sell their home right now because it's a hot market, maybe you had a house that you were doing as a rental and now you're like, oh, keeping your rentals hard, I'm just going to sell it.
Yeah.
And because it's a great market. That's awesome.
Right.
That's great. They need to be aware of these sellers' disclosures, because you can get into massive trouble if you're cutting corners or not fully disclosing and being transparent where you're required to do so.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to get into it. I think the buyers, in my opinion, need to be more aware because the sellers are highly protected by the way the law.
This is true. At least in Texas,
At least in Texas, yeah. And that's what...
Holla, Texas.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the litigation we're seeing out of my office. It's highly favorable to the sellers in most cases. So let's jump right in. I mean, one of the biggest things when you start looking at purchasing a home, everybody's heard about this before. You got an appraisal, you've got an inspection that gets done. Tell us about your experience with that. I mean, it's pretty kind of a blip on the radar thing for the most part, right?
No, not for us, actually.
Oh, really? Okay, well, good.
We hired a new build, and there was process. I was very, very involved with every step of this.
Not you. You weren't detail oriented. I mean, you're not a detail oriented.
I micromanaged every single little detail. You know I did.
Spencer may or may not have told me about some of the experiences y'all had.
Did he? No, I'm sure. Yes. Anyway, so we had an appraisal. I'm pretty sure we had to get 2 appraisals. And then we not only had 1 inspection, but 2 inspections, because the house wasn't fully complete and the inspector couldn't make 100% warranty, right? He couldn't make a full representation about the status of the house. And so we had the inspector go back. And then there were issues of, well, he was paid the first time, but our realtor was like, no, he won't charge you the second time. But then he did charge us the second time. And I was like, no, buddy, you told me you weren't, no. I'm not paying you a second time, but you need to give me that report. And so there was, I ironed it out, of course. And it was fine and resolved to my favor, clearly. But it was kind of a nightmare.
Sure.
But we got it all done. The inspection was finished both before and after. And even though there was a new build, there were still things that I had to talk to the home builder about. And I was like, you need to fix this before I close on it.
Yeah.
And that's not even going into the biggest issue, which was the deed.
Okay, well, let's hold off on that part yet, because
We won't go into that.
Yeah, I
right
want
now.
to focus on the condition of the house, and obviously it's a little different when you got a new build because you're dealing with a builder and all those kinds of things versus buying a home that's been lived in and that's been around for a while. But typically the purpose of an appraisal, it's usually for the lender. Right, the lender wants to make sure this house appraises for a certain value, so they can figure out how much they can loan, figure out if the person goes upside down, are they going to be able to recoup the bank, are they going to be able to recoup what they put out there, all that kind of stuff.
And you have to be approved, right?
You
So
do.
people, and I think buyers don't really understand this a lot of the time. Like you have to be approved for a loan, and you should probably get your approval letter before you actually go seriously house hunting. And pro tip. If you are a doctor or a lawyer, or I think maybe a dentist as well, there are some financial institutions like Wells Fargo, Holla, that actually offer you favorable rates.
Okay.
So you normally with houses, you have to put down 20% of the asking price to avoid PMI.
Sure.
Right? Do you want to explain what PMI is?
Why don't you do it, because I don't fully know what the acronym stands for, to be honest.
I can't, honestly, I don't even remember what the acronym stands for, but PMI is basically, if you don't put down 20%, like you have to pay extra on your mortgage, basically to prove that you're still financially worthy and stable.
Sure.
And it's the financial institution mitigating their risks.
Yeah.
So if you don't put down 20%, you get penalized and you have to pay more than just your mortgage.
Right.
Okay, but if you're a doctor or a lawyer, these financial institutions realize, especially if you're younger, like in your 20s or 30s, y'all are probably going to make more money, knock on wood, as you get older. And so you'll be fine. And so they won't actually, you can put down less than 20% and you won't get charged PMI.
Yeah.
Not everyone does that, but Wells Fargo did that for me.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So ask.
So, but kind of branching off of that, from the the appraisal goes to the lender. That's to help that all of the situation you were just talking about, and the inspection, obviously, trying to make sure the house is up to code, make sure that there's not something glaringly wrong with it.
Yeah, like a foundation issue. That's one of the biggest things in Texas. Most of my construction cases, that deal with construction defect, all come from issues with the foundation or cracking in concrete poured for the house. Because most of Texas, northern, central, we sit on pretty terrible clay soil. And clay soil, you put a little water in there, it expands.
Right.
And then it dries out or it freezes and it contracts.
Right.
So all this movement, this expansion and this cracking, if the foundation isn't properly put in or laid or kept up, causes cracks. And if it's an older house and it's slab on grade and it's not a pier and it was poorly done, it can start to slide or sink.
Right.
And those are expensive to fix.
They are, and they're unsightly to live in.
Yeah, they are unsightly to live in. Like I was down in Gerald, Texas doing an inspection the other day because the plaintiff is claiming that my design firm that I represent didn't create a effective design to remediate the sinking of the southern portion of her house, which was a pre-existing issue that my client had nothing to do with. They were just brought in to try and fix it. So it's a real issue. You spend a lot of money.
You do.
So
and
try not to have that be an issue in the first place.
And a lot of people, and we're going to table the appraisal inspection, come back to it in a second, but a lot of people, that's the check the box kind of thing. You get the appraisal done, you get the inspection done. Okay, good. We should be good to go. There's other parts of the contract that go into this. You've got escrow money that is deposited by the buyer that sits there in case, and then if they back out of the contract, depending on certain circumstances, seller gets to keep some of that. The option period's there. We can talk about that probably more when we have our guests on. But one of the big key issues in these contracts is the seller's disclosures. And what that is as you've experienced.
Educate us,
Yeah.
Austin.
Well, it's the seller has to disclose defaults or problems with the house that they know about.
If someone died in the house, do they have to disclose that?
That's arguable. So that's one of those things.
There's a lot of case law on that, actually.
There is? Okay.
I think, there's I shouldn't say a lot. I think there's some case law on it, and I think there's like a question there.
Yeah.
There's a question there.
I mean, I think the key component for me on this is that this is what people get caught up on that we're going to dive deeper into is the seller actually has to know. We have this thing in law where we have actual knowledge and we have constructive knowledge, which means you should have known, or it's pretty apparent that you could have known, should have known, whatever. In seller's disclosures, That's not how it works.
Which is wild
It is.
to me because that's a massive departure.
It is, big time. And that's the reason that this is such a favorable situation for sellers, because what happens is that unless you can prove that that person actually knew that this problem existed at the time that they sold you the home and did not disclose it, you're kind of SOL.
Let's give an example.
So the one of the easiest examples is we'll go with foundation, because in my experience, foundation, electrical, and plumbing, sometimes the plumbing and foundation can be tied together.
Oftentimes the plumbing and foundation are tied together.
Those are the three big issues that we see in our office when people come in that have problems. New buyers come in and they say, okay, well, this is what's happened. So let's talk about foundation. You can go into a house and see that, okay, there's major foundation problems. And let's say that you had an appraisal, you had an inspection, they didn't catch it. Then all of a sudden you start to notice some major problems. The doors aren't shutting, things like that after you buy the home. You bring in your foundation guy, he comes in and says, well, you have major problems. This thing needs to be put up on beams, or this thing needs to be, oh geez, I'm blanking now.
What, you want to jack up the foundation, create a pier and beam foundation underneath it?
No, I'm talking.
I was about to say, that's difficult.
No, what's the, why am I blanking on this? We talk about it all the time in my office. Whenever you repair in the foundation, you have to
Foundational repair?
Yeah, well, there's actual like techniques for how they do it.
Yeah.
And so anyways, they come in and they say, well, we've got to do this. It's going to be, $20,000.
Yeah, I mean, you can do a bunch of, there are different things that you can do for foundational repair. I mean, especially if you have like a basement, right? You can do bracing of the wall and piers and upper ceiling with like a mushroom pier setup. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that, your guy comes in and says, we got to do all these things. And then, they come to our office, come to a lawyer and they say, well, I've got to spend all this money. I bought this house 6 months ago.
I want to be recouped for my costs.
Yeah, I want the sellers should pay for this.
Yeah, good luck.
Well, that's the problem, is that you've got to prove if the sellers didn't actually know there was foundation problems, then you've got a problem. And so that's what one of the things that we talk about all the time whenever people come into our office about this is, okay, well, a lot of people want to come in and say, well, my foundation guy says that there's no way they couldn't have known. Like they had to have known about this.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
But is that actually true? Usually not.
Well, and it doesn't matter if they should have known about it. If they didn't actually know there was a problem, it doesn't really matter. We get a lot of times people come in and they say, well, I talked to the neighbors. The neighbors said, yeah, this house has had a problem for many years. We know that the foundation is bad.
But did the owner know?
Still don't get there.
You still don't. And here's the thing too, is that in that situation, good luck trying to sell the homeowner, or sue the sellers. At this point, if it truly is a situation where it was so severe and the foundation guy should have known but missed it, okay, now maybe if you hired the foundation inspector and he didn't catch it, maybe you can sue him for professional negligence.
Yeah, and we've looked at that too. Part of the problem with that is those guys are not there. Those inspectors typically aren't bonded or insured like you would really need to be to take care of somebody who's injured in that way, in that regard. It's a really tough situation, because another part with trying to sue the seller, well, they just sold the house and most of the time they went and bought another house. And so they're not cash rich at this point.
No, they're not. They have no money.
You can go get a judgment against them maybe if you can get past the evidence parts, but are they going to have cash to pay you? Probably not.
And also, by the way, if someone decides to sue a design professional like an architect or a professional engineer, I think something that a lot of people don't know is that in the lawsuit, they're going to have to file what's called a certificate of merit. And it's basically you have to have another design professional that does basically the exact same thing that the design professional you're complaining of does. And then produce a report saying, here are my qualifications. This other person messed up. By the way, we do the same thing and I'm licensed in the same thing.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, your case is going to get dismissed.
Right.
So I think a lot of people don't realize that. So never sue a design professional pro se. Never do anything pro se. Always hire a lawyer. Always hire a lawyer.
That's always your advice. You never do anything pro se.
That is the one piece of legal advice that I actually will say I give on this podcast is always hire a lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, and going back to the foundation thing, I think that the couple of situations I've seen before where maybe you can prove, because look, you're trying to prove the person knew that there was a problem. They're not going to come out and say, yeah,
of course they're not going to.
I knew there was a problem. My bad.
Oh, you got me.
You got me.
Dead to rights.
They're not going to do that.
No.
Now, I have seen where there's been evidence of concealing of cracks on walls and concealing, they painted over, they've caulked over certain things. They've tried to hide some of the
purportedly attempted to hide. Maybe they're like, funny, this showed up, doesn't look pretty. I'll paint it just for my own aesthetic pleasure.
Well, and it's more of, can you get enough cumulative evidence of all these things to show like, okay, there was some stuff here that.
Because showing intent, right? Because intent is an element of fraud, and that is extremely hard to prove.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have basically have to have like a truckload of circumstantial evidence to be able to prove intent, because you're not going to get in that person's head and they're not going to admit it.
Here's a little tangent. We use terms all the time. So direct and circumstantial. I think a lot of people are confused about what circumstantial evidence is. You want to explain kind of what that is?
Circumstantial evidence is it's basically evidence that's relevant and can help prove a fact, but it's not direct evidence. So for example, let's say you're claiming Bobby killed Susie. Okay, well, direct evidence is Bobby is saying, yeah, I killed Susie. Circumstantial evidence is that you found Bobby's fingerprints all over Susie's neck and bruising that matches the hand pattern. I don't know if that's thing that Bobby had.
Yeah.
So that would be circumstantial evidence.
Right. And I think a lot of people get confused when they hear circumstantial. They think, oh, well, that's not. It's not relevant evidence.
It is extremely relevant evidence, and a lot of times cases are won and lost on circumstantial evidence.
Most of the time, right?
Most of the time. And circumstantial and direct evidence are equally as valuable and as valid. They have equal weight in the courtroom.
Yeah. And I think if you think about it, I mean, if you had direct evidence of something, you're probably not going to trial because someone's dead to rights. You're going to settle, you're going to plead the case out if it's a criminal case, because if you've got him on camera shooting somebody, okay, well, there's not really much we need there.
There really isn't.
Now, versus circumstantial. Okay, so let's talk about these cracks.
Sure.
If you've got direct evidence, would be the seller admitting, yes, I covered this up. Yes, I knew about the foundation.
Or direct evidence would be maybe their Google Home recorded them saying, oh, we need to cover these cracks so that we can trick the buyer into thinking there's no foundational problems. And then that comes out.
Yeah. Circumstantial would be, okay, you've got things have been covered up. I mean, and even the evidence of the neighbors saying that they knew or they had conversations with the seller about this stuff. Those types of things can come into play. And that's the type of stuff you'd have to use to prove that, yes, this person defrauded us by withholding this information.
Although conversations with the neighbors can teeter into hearsay.
They can, but if the neighbors testify, I'm saying if the neighbors testifying to to
what the actual sellers were saying, then admission of a party opponent.
That's what I was.
That's not hearsay.
Right. So, I think one of the biggest things that legally, say that you find one of these problems and you think you have a case, or you talk to a lawyer, they say, look, you may have a case against the seller. You can sue them for breach of contract. The biggest thing we see is the Deceptive Trade Practices Act. People will sue under that. And the idea with that act, and we won't go into the full details of it, but it gives you as the buyer, you're saying, this person defrauded me by making false statements. They intentionally did it. And you do have an opportunity to potentially get triple your damages if you can prove they willfully, intentionally.
Which is a big deal. Yeah. Triple damages is a big deal.
And so a lot of times you'll see that claim thrown around because it's intimidating. It maybe scare the people into, negotiation, settlement, that kind of deal. Really the best solution for this, and this is what we try to preach to our real estate agents that we do. So at our firm, we teach a lot of continuing education courses for real estate brokers. Get a foundation guy out there, get a plumber out there, get an electrician out there, do your due diligence there, because really the way that the Texas Real Estate Commission contract is set up, they're saying, if you got your appraisal, you got your inspection, that was your opportunity to figure out if something was wrong with the house. If you didn't do that and the seller didn't know about it, sorry, you're kind of stuck with the bag. Yeah. And that's a hard pill to swallow, especially if it's your first house, but if it's any house, because you just made an expensive purchase that you're not living with every day, you know? And it can be extremely expensive to try and fix. And, really, this is kind of weird to say on the show, but the better solution is not a legal solution, it's a practical solution.
Which is ironic for us to say.
Right. So, take care of this stuff before and spend the extra money to have somebody go out and look at it.
Which is one of the reasons I insisted that there be a second inspection after my house was completed.
There you go.
For free.
There you go. Well, I think these seller disclosure issues, they're going to keep coming up.
Oh, for sure.
And hopefully people can be a little bit more diligent on the front end when they're buying a home, because sellers are really protected in these situations.
They are. And you just, due diligence. Thing. Yeah. You gotta do it.
Absolutely. Well, this is the first part and hopefully a multiple part discussion we get to have over the next couple months on the real estate market and all the things that are going on with it. So stay tuned and come check us out later on some more discussions about the Texas real estate market and probably some things that even bleed outside of Texas as well.
We'll see.
Thanks, guys.
Hey y'all, don't go. We have closing arguments coming up for you in just a second. But before you listen, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast if you got any value from today's episode. And please share the podcast with others. And if you want to interact with Austin or me, or tell us what you want to hear next, you can find me on Instagram at andrea.s.turner, Austin at the Dallas Lawyer spelled out, or the podcast #lawyered spelled out. Look forward to hearing from you.
NFL quarterback Lamar Jackson's mom may be setting the new level of NFL quarterback pay coming soon. Unlike most other players, Jackson is opting to use his mother instead of an agent to negotiate his new deal with the Baltimore Ravens. Agents in the NFL are required to be licensed to practice law, and they traditionally take a percentage of their clients' pay as their compensation. Jackson, seeking to avoid paying this fee, is opting to have his mother do the talking with the Ravens. We'll see how this plays out and whether this creates a new trend moving forward with future NFL quarterbacks.